Welcome to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds, featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I am your host, Larissa Napolitan, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team, here to lead conversations and to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. Maybe you've been listening for a while, or this is your first episode. If you like what you hear, would you do us a favor by rating and reviewing us on iTunes? This is a fantastic way to tell us you enjoy what we are creating. Also, if you want more MTSS resources, sign up for our weekly newsletter using the link in our show notes, and check out our website for all the blogs and guides you would ever need about MTSS. Behavior intervention is a top priority for many schools right now. And research shows that reaching those students with challenging behaviors can change the trajectory of their life. Today on the podcast, we have two guests who are experts in this area. Trudy Bender, a former school psychologist and the current senior manager of thought leadership and MTSS content here at Branching Minds, and Chris Causebrook, a current MTSS specialist for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. I'm going to pass the mic to them so they can give us a deep dive into Tier 3 behavior planning.
Thank you. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself first?
I am so thrilled to be here with you. It is such an honor, and so. But I do want to kind of pull out a couple things, a few personal and a couple professional, because some of you may be, well, where is Charlotte, North Carolina, and what is Charlotte-Mecklenburg School all about? And so we are a very large district. We have about currently right now we have 184 schools, and I say currently because we are in the process of building several elementary schools and high schools, and we serve over 145,000 students, and we are broken into 9 learning communities, and so very, very large. Lots to do, and to use your expertise and all the skills that you acquire. And then personally, I have been married over a decade. So yes, I've made it past that 10 mark. We have 2 beautiful girls. My wife is actually in education as well. So,
Well, I
and I'll
think
turn
you're
it
going
over
to
to
have
Trudy.
bragging rights. I've lived all over the country. I've lived in North and South Dakota, so shout out to those Dakota educators, along with work in Los Angeles and New Jersey, and then finally working here in Waco, Texas. And it is such a privilege to come together and talk about behavior and the difference that we can make for Tier 3 students who have Tier 3 behavior needs. We know from the research that a lot of these kids don't have great life outcomes. So when you apply yourself to reaching students who have big behavior challenges, you really are changing the trajectory of a child's life. And we want to share with you some things that will really make a difference, things that we've learned along the way. We're going to share some of our mistakes, a lot of resources that we found helpful to us. So let's dive right in. We're going to talk today about some system level things that will make Tier 3 behavior intervention even possible at your district. Without these factors, hard to even get it off the ground. And then we want to talk about some practical things that Chris and I have learned to make your Tier 3 behavior intervention just feasible, more likely to happen. You can have some of the greatest systems, but if it doesn't really take into account the reality on the ground and the challenges that we're currently facing, teacher shortages, so much bigger behavioral needs starting earlier. Those little ones are cropping up with really big behavior needs too. So we want to talk about how to make it practical, and then we're going to leave some time for questions and answers at the end. So we're going to talk I want to touch on Tier 3 behavior and MTSS. If you're not familiar with this language of MTSS, or multi-tiered system of support, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I encourage you to dig in. We're going to send you some resources that have to do directly with this. But really what MTSS is a way of organizing all of the resources that you have available to you to reach all of your students. So you take what you've got, you want to align it together into a system to make the very best use of your staff, your resources, your time, and your space, and to reach the whole child, and to think it's not just an academic issue or just a behavior issue. These things so often go together. And so we want to think big picture about supporting students as whole people. That framework, when it's applied to behavior, is called MTSS behavior, or sometimes it's also called positive behavior interventions and supports, or PBIS. And you may have heard of PBIS just in terms of points and parties and things like that, but really that's just a tiny, tiny component of PBIS. Really, it's a full-fledged way of organizing your supports for students with behavioral challenges. So today we're going to talk a lot about that continuum of behavior interventions. Now, we do want to acknowledge that a positive school climate, good structure, clear expectations really do make a difference, especially for our tier 3 behavior kids. And we know that we need good data-driven decision making in order to adjust and adapt what we're doing at the individual student level and also at the district level. We want to acknowledge that. And so it leads us to this first pitfall we're going to share with you. And that is that trying to provide intensive intervention without good school-wide supports is totally overwhelming. Have you found that to be true, Chris, in your case, that if you don't have good overall support?
Yes, indeed. It's almost like Swiss cheese. Lots of holes
Oh.
are present.
Yeah, that's a great visual for it. So, one thing that I've said is that schools don't have staff time resources to implement an unlimited number of tier 3 plans for students. And if you see what actually goes into doing a tier 3 plan, I've had staff members just be like, you want us to do what? Like, it's very, very time consuming. It's expensive. It's expensive in terms of your time, your staffing, your space, everything. It really is a big undertaking, but one that is so worthwhile. So let's dig in a little bit to talk about the difference between district and campus planning and individual student planning. We're going to be focusing on the first today, but that's not to say that they're both not important. So there's the kind of tier 3 behavior planning we do to make that individual student planning possible. That's what we're talking about today. We're talking about the systems that support delivery of interventions. We'll touch real briefly on individual student behavior planning. That's super important too. We have some resources for that. But today we're talking about that underlying system. And so let's talk about those components that make tier 3 behavior intervention even possible. So here are the critical factors: district and campus teams that oversee tier 3 behavior intervention, universal screening for behavior. How are you identifying the kids that need help? Designated staff and space, professional development and coaching, or none of the above. And we want you to start where you are. I know you have some things in place to support students. So how can you build on where you are, and then take it step by step? And I can tell you, when I started in my work in this, I was in a district that had none of those things in place. And so bit by bit by bit, we built a real working system to support our kids with tier 3 behavior needs. So let's talk about um, district teams. That was the very first thing that we mentioned. And Chris, I think you're going to tell us a little bit about district teams and how this functions in your district.
Yeah, and definitely, Trudy, to echo what you're saying, Rome was not built in a day. So give yourself patience and grace, and um, highlight the great things that you're already doing. And so um, one big thing with us, because we are very, very large, is that with our size, we do have a district MTSS leadership team that is made up of key district stakeholders that could include executive director or director from student discipline, the multilingual department, student wellness and academic support, data use for school improvement. So really getting the key players together to help build that robust framework of how are we going to address staffing and funding and technology and the resource, and most importantly, the professional development. You don't know what you don't know, so we have to make sure that we have a very good idea of what professional development needs, and to be able to give that to the boots on the ground. And so the other unique thing with North Carolina is that we have a facilitated assessment of MTSS, which at the district level and at the state level. Um, and so if you love acronyms, we are really big with in CMS with acronyms. Um, that is called the FAM-S and the FAM-D. So all of our schools engage in the FAM-S, which is a tool that measures school progress towards full implementation of a multi-tiered system of support. And really the big purpose of schools engaging in this is that the results of the data that we get is going to help schools and administration identify and prioritize implementation steps. Going back to Rome was not built in a day. So we have to be able to kind of see and hear where we're at to start building off of that. And so the good thing is from the district team is that they take that assessment themselves, and then it's very to have that alignment. It's really good to see, well, what are our schools saying, and then maybe what the district team's saying. Do we have clear expectations or not? And so, which obviously helps when we are tackling everything.
Chris, I love that you said that, because rubrics really help us direct this work. In fact, we're going to share several rubrics that you can use to help guide this step by step. So I love the way that a rubric can help guide that work. I think that's so important to have a roadmap. How do you know if you've arrived if you don't even have that step by step, thing that says, yes, you've done it the right way. Here you go.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing I just want to highlight here is that we do have a crosswalk with the TFI, which is a tiered fidelity inventory, with our FAM-S. So we're able to really draw out specific items on that FAM-S and how that relates to specifically what we're talking about right now, our supports around social emotional learning, attendance, and behavior supports. So that's like our district, and then that kind of feeds into our campus. And so we have a couple consistent saying besides y'all. I had to learn that coming from Buffalo, New York. So I'm still acclimated to saying you guys, but we can't intervene out of a core issue, and so that's a big saying that we like to put on and start meetings, in that we are all MTSS. And so with the support of that district MTSS leadership team, our campus team specifically, and we'll get a peek behind the window and share some things around our student services PLC and that intensive team, will be well equipped with the tools and the resources to be successful, not only at tier 3, but for tier 2 and at our core. So this is a little sneak peek behind our structure. We definitely don't want our schools to think that the team themselves to death, because there is a lot of teams that are happening, a lot of great work that is happening within the school building, but to really funnel all that into being very specific when we're thinking about the structure and the content that goes along with it. You have the team, the MTSS leadership team, which is in green, and that is responsible for planning for our MTSS infrastructure. So thinking about like master scheduling, planning time, that professional development, from communicating core expectations, as well as analyzing school-wide data across all the domains of attendance, behavior, social emotional learning, and academics, and to determine that the health of what's going on with our core, kind of going back to that one of our sayings, you cannot intervene out of a core issue, to help support the PLCs in core strengthening if needed and intervention support. So the leadership and team is represents that core, and the multicolored teams, those are your grade level PLCs and student services PLCs, and then we represent the 3-tiered with these teams. They do all the work that addresses the needs for each one. So for example, if the grade level PLC analyzes data to plan for core instruction as well as intervention match for students who are not successful with only differentiated core, the student services supports core attendance, behavior, and SEL, as well as an intervention matching. We're all connected. There's like not a stone that's not on turn. We're really working collaboratively together. And then, of course, then you have that red team, which is our intensive team, which meets to do individual problem solving and intervention planning for individual students. So um, the big takeaway to help stamp what you're seeing here is, most importantly, within this illustration, there are built in those communication structures between these teams to ensure that we are meeting the needs of all of our students.
Yeah, in some schools that are really small, they won't have anything this elaborate, but they still have to provide all of these functions. Sometimes it's almost the same people on all of these teams, but you have to have time set aside to talk about each one of these issues and then have an organized way of identifying who needs support, how are we going to provide it, who's going to serve. And then in larger districts, as you've said, I think it's so important to make sure that there's at least one person overlapping on these teams so that they can communicate back and forth. So for example, in our behavior PLC, what we would have called that on campuses, typically the academic RTI coordinator would sit in on those meetings because she was the one that scheduled all meetings. And we didn't want to have one behavior meeting and one academic meeting about the same student. We wanted to get everybody around the table. And so we tried as much as we could to have some overlap between, or as you said, a really good communication protocol to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Yes, yes,
Love that.
yes, and that's a great springboard, and a document that we share with the school teams when we are coaching them, to who should be those members and the key responsibilities, and then how often should we be meeting. And a consistent member of all those teams, as you can imagine, is the administrator. We definitely want an administrator at each of those teams, and that way. We have found that more success is going to happen when we do have that. And so that is a good document to help clear team membership roles and some key responsibilities within those teams. And then we also, for that leadership team, have a month by month, starting back like all the way into August, of setting up your systems of support. And so what are those action steps that we can take to help build that impenetrable MTSS framework and all those systems within that?
I just love this because it gives your teams a roadmap for the entire year. Like, this is what we're going to be working on right away. Again, time is limited. They cannot do everything at once. So, building it out step by step, giving them the resources that they need to take back to their campus and, set that up. It's just so helpful. Well, let's talk a little bit about screening. So, screening is the next thing that we need to have in order to really provide great behavior support. And so identifying the students that need help is a critical part of MTSS, and being systematic about it. Kids fall through the cracks on this kind of thing all the time. Screening is what helps. Screening is like that safety net that prevents any kid from falling through the cracks. I'm going to share with you just a couple of options for screening. These are options that are integrated into the Branching Minds platform. So they're the ones that I'm most familiar with, and some that I've actually used here. The SRSSIE, Student Risk Screening Scale, internalizing and externalizing. Those two words are really important. In fact, so we're going to come back to the SRSSIE. There's also the SICA, which is a student facing. This is freely available. It's great if you have it integrated into the technology that you already use. Otherwise, you're dealing with all kinds of spreadsheets and all of that. But you can just independently administer some of these assessments. The SICA is a student-facing assessment for older students in which they themselves identify their own challenges in social skills developments and competencies. And then the DESA is another really well regarded, well-researched student strengths assessment. So these each hit a little bit of a different angle. There's, of course, lots of different ways to look at student behavior and what might be behind it. So the SRSSIE is a direct kind of behavioral risk screener, whereas the SICA and the DESA are student strengths assessments to kind of see what are their strengths that you can build on. Whereas the first one is what are the risk levels for the student in terms of poor outcomes. And so let me talk just a little bit more about that SRSSIE. This is such a great tool, and here's why. It is really, really easy to focus all effort on students with external behaviors like aggression, like elopement. You can't avoid those. You can't not address kids who are beating up other students or their teachers, who are
Mhm.
verbally or physically violent. You cannot ignore a child who is running out your front door down the highway. You have to provide intervention for those things. These are also typically written up, so they show up in office discipline referrals, so you can flag it that way. It's really easy to focus all of your efforts there because it feels like the house is on fire when you have big external behaviors like aggression and elopement. But I will tell you that you are missing out if you are not screening on internalizing behaviors like withdrawal, depression, anxiety, loneliness. Those kids are every bit as deserving of our help. And I would argue that the safety of that student and others are also every bit as dependent, because these are the students who often can end up feeling hopeless, and it can lead to violence against themselves and against others when they feel totally withdrawn, totally hopeless and disillusioned. And so we want to reach those students. And if we can screen for this and see the signs early, identify those students and address them with additional supports, we can help change those outcomes and give them a more positive future. And so, those are the kids that just might have their hoodie up, they're in the back, and no one's paying any attention. We want to catch those students too. So I really encourage you to use a screening tool like the SRSSIE that will capture both those externalizing factors and the internalizing factors. Don't just use your office discipline referrals to screen. If that's all you've got, it's a good starting point. If a kid's been sent to the office 5 times, you need to talk about it. But don't just rely on that alone. You need a fuller picture so that those kids with internalizing issues aren't missed. All right, let's talk a little bit about designated staff and space. And I know that this is an issue. What do? We don't have a place and we don't have a person to deal with these big tier 3 behavior issues. These kids have big challenging behaviors, and it's going to come out somewhere. I have seen nurses, the school nurse ends up, that's the kid's person. The kid ends up spending all day in the nurse's office while they're trying to get it together. um, Somebody is going to have to deal with it. And so, even if you don't currently have designated staff and space, first of all, I would argue that it's time to get some. That it's time to get some. If you're a district administrator here and you are having tier 3 behavior challenges in your district, I would strongly encourage you, if at all possible, to take some resources and put them towards designated staff space resources for tier 3 behavior, because it has such an impact, not just on that student, but on all of the students and your staff in the environment. An AP who has nowhere to go and no one to help with students who need real skillful intervention is going to be shut down. They're not going to be able to do their other responsibilities. So I want to give you just a couple of practical things that have helped for us. One is that someone on the campus gets that training and has it as part of their job description, even if it's not their main job description. Here, and what you can do in that situation is that when the need arises, someone else can step in and do that person's regular role so that they can step out and deal with the tier 3 behavior, both planned and unplanned. So, for example, I worked with a wonderful school counselor. The campus had a behavior interventionist, lost it, was now falling all to this school counselor, and they were in reactive mode. They were chasing this kid all day long. He wasn't getting anything done anyway. It's not like he could do his job. And so we sat down together as a school staff and said, what if this counselor begins to provide proactive tier 3 behavior intervention, which is going to be really intensive and time consuming for a while. And then another person will take over some of these counseling duties that he was doing. In terms, he had several things that were going on, but there was another person on campus who was able to deal with those so that he could move into that role. And I will tell you, it took about 3 weeks for the change to happen. And we had what I would say an almost miraculous change in this young person's life, who went from being in class maybe 10% of the time to being in class 80 to 90% of the time or more. You're going to spend the time. Why not spend it in a proactive, meaningful way, getting ahead of the behavior? You're not going to be able to get away from it. So really think carefully about how you can make space and staff and resources to deal with these big behavior challenges. They're not going away. They're not getting less. If anything, what we hear is we've got more and more students who are dealing with big behavior challenges. So there's my soapbox. I know some of you are like, preach, preach. I know you know that, but I just want to say it out loud that it's so, so important. So, Chris, in your huge district, tell us a little bit about what you're providing. And I noticed you didn't necessarily have behavior staff on every campus. So, talk a little bit about what this looks like at Charlotte-Mecklenburg.
Yeah, so like Trudy's saying, there's no I in team, so we have to be able to come together as a team and have that team approach, especially even of course I'm biased when it comes to those very challenging behaviors, because it's you may need to you tap out for a little bit and rely on your colleague to be able to come in and give you a little bit of a breather. So there's definitely, we have to have that team approach. And so every school in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, we do have a counselor at every school. We have at least an itinerant school psychologist. We may have a social worker as well. And then schools may have what we call a BMT, which is a behavior modification technician, to work together as a team to put together a support plan for that student, but also most importantly to that proactive as well. Like, how can we be proactive, and what is our data saying that will lead to some of those proactive measures? And then from the district, we do have some supports as well, especially with those severe challenging behaviors where we do have some BMT specialists. We have some core behavior specialists. We have an SEL specialist. We have intensive behavior coordinators as well to rally the troops together. And that way, we're all together to solve not only what's going on, but then also how do we be more proactive and rather than reactive. So a lot of push in, a lot of support. It just can't be one person doing this work. And as we'll get into a little bit later of like what the kind of can look like. But yeah, I definitely echo what Trudy is saying, because we have to come together and bring all of our skills and talents that we have, because each one of us has that, and play to those strengths. So that's kind of like how we handle that within our school system.
Yeah. So one thing I faced, I do want to put a pitfall here, and that is underskilled or overwhelmed behavior staff can actually make things worse. So do be cautious about this. I've worked with districts who thought, well, we'll just hire a lot of paraprofessional staff to deal with our behavior, and they're less expensive, and some of them are just they're wonderful, and they can provide a really nice connection with the community. Sometimes they're neighbors and aunties and so forth, and they really know the kids. But sometimes if they become overwhelmed or they don't have the skills or the training or the support, you can actually have a lot of an increase in negative interactions with your students. So make sure when you do have behavior staff, they are trained and they are protected in their role as a positive intervention support, not somebody who stands in the hallway and yells at kids or is like an easy button to get kids out of their classrooms, but instead that they are in a proactive role, a relationship building role that can be really important with the behavior staff that you do have. Let's talk a little bit about professional development. Of course, there's all kinds of individual professional development that needs to happen for people who are actually providing the interventions. But what about the teams? Chris, you want to talk about this just for a moment?
Yeah, and this is where I was saying, remember our visual with that teaming structure. So within that student services PLC, that team and the team itself, those members that make up the team, which would be your social worker, your counselor, your nurse, your BMT, that they have time to not only conduct planning for their service delivery, but also that continuous improvement. So we really emphasize a big push of making sure those individuals and that team has the time to be able to attend any professional development, just like our friends from the academics PLC, they'll have that planning time as well. Like student services team will have to have that built in, of course, and that's why we try to emphasize that right in the beginning. So because it's hard to get time back once the school year has started. So that is definitely a big. We try to stamp that right in the beginning of the school year, because that having that time to be able to unpack, like, how does our team itself fit within this MTSS framework? What data do we need to look at? What skills do I have in my toolbox that I need to attend and get more training in? Progress monitoring, that's huge. There's different progress monitoring uh, templates of how we are going to do that, but like it's going to be more successful when we are unified in what maybe the platforms that we have to help with that progress monitoring, because you want to make sure whatever supports that you're putting in place, you're able to see, is that working or not. And sometimes it's when you start getting that progress monitoring data back, we like to look through the lens of ICE ISO, I should say, through, well, what's going on with the instruction, what's going on with that curriculum, what's going on with the environment, and then most importantly, what's going on with the learner, to help unpack that progress monitoring data to make those next determinations. And then FBA, BIP, I know that can be very, very scary, but it's extremely beneficial to work together as a team if we do need to conduct that FBA, because it takes time to really conduct a full-blown FBA and put together a solid behavior intervention plan.
So I had mentioned earlier that we have all of these rubrics to guide the work. We're finishing out our section now on what makes behavior intervention even possible. Like, these are the things that you need in place to make it possible. And these resources have been extremely helpful to both Chris and to I, starting with the tiered fidelity inventory. This is a freely available resource through pbis.org, the National Behavior Support Organization. They have a whole technology to support it as well. It's free to use. I used this for many years, and as soon as we started measuring it, we started seeing results. The TFI is a fantastic resource. Check it out and use it. PBIS.org also has some great tier 3 behavior resources directly, just like to take you right, like, think about this for tier 3. So Branching Minds, I use this as well. They have a self-assessment of MTSS implementation, and we have a whole guide that goes together with that. And so I'd encourage you to check that out. And then North Carolina has a website. A lot of their resources are freely available. So what Chris mentioned about the FAM-S and the FAM-D are there. So you can see some of those resources there as well. And so if you don't currently have a rubric that's guiding your work, that would be a great next step. All right, I promised that we would touch on individual behavior support planning. This could be a whole day, week, whatever, of training in itself. We're just going to touch on it. I want to give you a couple of resources. So what makes a tier 3 behavior plan distinctive is that it's multidisciplinary. It's based on function of behavior. You know, Chris just mentioned that FBA. Even if you don't have a full-blown FBA, you know, a lot of these kids are not special ed, or maybe they didn't qualify for special ed, but they still have big behavior needs. We can think functionally about behavior. Everyone in your campus can be trained to think functionally about behavior. What's the underlying cause? What might be triggering this behavior? What might be maintaining this behavior and causing it to continue? And then here's the biggest deal, which is that comprehensive support. If you're wondering what goes into that, check out the TFI, the comprehensive support, where you are really thinking through every single factor that might be going into this complicated behavior, and then wraparound services. So it is a really a big, comprehensive kind of plan that goes into changing tier 3 behavior. All right, we're going to move now into making tier 3 behavior intervention practical. So these are some practical tips that Chris and I have put together for you to talk about how to make this actually work in the real world of schools, because it's tough in schools. So let's talk a little bit about each one of these. First of all, we have the standard treatment protocol. The standard treatment protocol means that you have a way of doing things that's written down so everybody knows what the expectations are. Just that step can make a big difference. That standard treatment protocol, that's a structure that makes it easier to provide tier 3 behavior intervention in the school. A structure like check-in, check-out, that is where a student has a mentor that they're meeting with beginning and end of the day, and they're getting feedback from the teacher throughout the day. Check-in, check-out is typically a tier 2 intervention, but we can individualize it and intensify it for our tier 3 kids. Just makes it possible to give more feedback and to collect the data that you need. I'm going to mention a couple resources from Safe and Civil Schools. If you're familiar with Safe and Civil Schools, I'll give them a shout out. I love a lot of their resources for behavior. The PASS model, I used to say branching minds and the PASS model are the two things that I'll die on that hill. Like, I love these things for the difference that they've made in my work. The PASS model is a way of organizing push-in support for kids with big behavior challenges. Originally designed for kids who have emotional disturbance. I used it in my district for kids. We used it for that, but also for kids who weren't identified as special education, but who had big behavior needs, and saw some incredible success for students with behavior challenges. First step next is for the littles. It's kind of like PASS, but for the littles. And I really, really like this. It's a little bit spendy, but you don't need lots and lots of kits. But to get one kit and have that available for those little ones made a big difference for a lot of our campuses. And then tier 1 and 2 supports continued and adapted as needed. More than anyone, our tier 3 kids need really good, positive, warm school climates, lots of relationship building, lots of connection, clear expectations, all of those things, recognition for when they do well, all of that. So then we also have content. So we just talked about structure, right? These are not the actual content. They're the structure that makes providing the content or the intervention possible. We need to also talk about intervention content that's designed for school. School's not a therapeutic setting. So there are a lot of things you can't do at school that maybe you can do at an ABA clinic or you can, do in therapy, but that's not what school is. And so having social and emotional skills curriculum that's aligned with your school-wide program is great. Intensive intervention strategies, resources. I would mention Safe and Civil Schools again. They have some wonderful resources for individualized intervention, wraparound and mental health support coordinated in school. We were just getting into this in my district and what a difference it can make if you have these agreements where some of these services can be provided within the school setting as part of a kid's tier 3 behavior intervention plan.
Wow. Well, thank you so much to both of you for all the information you provided and resources, which we'll share in the show notes. And we just thank you for your expertise. And yes, if you want to know more and get some more information, you can check out the show notes for all the links. And yeah, thank you so much for being here.
This has been so great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn @Branching Minds.